father of geometry. Real mathematics that you will do. Arithmetic. The laws of nature are but the mathematical thoughts of God. And this is a quote by Euclid of Alexandria, who was a Greek mathematician and philosopher who lived about 300 years before Christ. And the reason why I include this quote is because Euclid is considered to be the father of geometry. And it is a neat quote, regardless of your views of God, whether or not God exists or the nature of God. It says something very fundamental about nature. The laws of nature are but the mathematical thoughts of God, that math underpins all of the laws of nature. And the word geometry itself has Greek roots. Geo comes from Greek for earth. Metry comes from Greek for measurement. You're probably used to something like the metric system. And Euclid is considered to be the father of geometry, not because he was the first person who studied geometry. You could imagine the very first humans might have studied geometry. They might have looked at two twigs on the ground that looked something like that, and they might have looked at another pair of twigs that looked like that and said, this is a bigger opening. What is the relationship here? Or they might have looked at a tree. They might have looked at a tree that had a branch that came off it like that. And they said, there's something similar about this opening here and this opening here. Or they might have asked themselves, what is the ratio? Or what is the relationship between the distance around a circle and the distance across it? And is that the same for all circles? And is there a way for us to feel really good that that is definitely true? And then once you got to the early Greeks, they started to get even more thoughtful, essentially, about geometric things. When you talk about, Greek mathematicians like Pythagoras, who came before Euclid. But the reason why Euclid is considered to be the father of geometry, and why we often talk about Euclidean geometry, is around 300 BC. And this right over here is a picture of Euclid painted by Raphael. And no one really knows what Euclid looked like even when he was born or when he died. So this is just Raphael's impression of what Euclid might have looked like while he was teaching in Alexandria. But what made Euclid the father of geometry is really his writing of Euclid's Elements. And what the Elements were 13 volumes of essentially a 13-volume textbook, and arguably the most famous textbook of all time. And what he did in those 13 volumes is he essentially did a rigorous, thoughtful, logical march through geometry and number theory, and then also solid geometry, so geometry in 3 dimensions. And this right over here is the frontispiece for the English version or the first translation of the English version of Euclid's Elements, and this was done in 1570, but it was obviously first written in Greek, and then during much of the Middle Ages, that knowledge was shepherded by the Arabs, and it was translated into Arabic, and then eventually in the late Middle Ages, translated into Latin, and then obviously eventually English. And when I say that he did a rigorous march, what Euclid did is he didn't just say, I think if you take the square of one side of a right triangle, the length of one side of a right triangle and the length of the other side of the right triangle is going to be the same as the square of the hypotenuse, all of these other things, and we'll go into depth about what all of these things mean. He says, I don't want to just feel good that it's probably true. I want to prove to myself that it is true. And so what he did in Elements, especially the 6 books that are concerned with planar geometry, in fact, he did all of them, but from a geometrical point of view, he started with basic assumptions. So he started with basic assumptions, and those basic assumptions in geometric speak are called axioms or postulates. And from them, he deduced other statements or propositions, or these are sometimes called theorems. And then he says, now I know if this is true and this is true, this must be true. And he could also prove that other things cannot be true. So then he could prove that this is not going to be the true. He didn't just say, every circle I've said has this property. He says, I've now proven that this is true. And then from there, we can go and deduce other propositions or theorems. And we could use some of our original axioms to do that. And what's special about that is no one had really done that before. Rigorously proven beyond a shadow of a doubt across a whole broad sweep of knowledge. So not just one proof here or there. He did it for an entire set of knowledge that we're talking about. A rigorous march through a subject so that he could build this scaffold of axioms and postulates and theorems and propositions. And theorems and propositions are essentially the same thing. And essentially for about 2,000 years after Euclid, so this is unbelievable shelf life for a textbook, People didn't view you as educated if you did not read and understand Euclid's Elements. And Euclid's Elements, the book itself, was the second most printed book in the Western world after the Bible. This is a math textbook. It was second only to the Bible. When the first printing presses came out, they said, okay, let's print the Bible. What do we print next? Let's print Euclid's Elements. And to show that this is relevant into the fairly recent past, although some would, whether or not you argue that about 150, 160 years ago is a recent past, this right here is a direct quote from Abraham Lincoln, obviously one of the great American presidents. I like this picture of Abraham Lincoln. This is actually a photograph of Lincoln in his late 30s. But he was a huge fan of Euclid's Elements. He would actually use it to fine-tune his mind. While he was riding his horse, he would read Euclid's Element. While he was in the White House, he would read Euclid's Element. But this is a direct quote from Lincoln. In the course of my law reading, I constantly came upon the word demonstrate. I thought at first that I understood its meaning, but soon became satisfied that I did not. I said to myself, what do I do when I demonstrate more than when I reason or prove? How does demonstration differ from any other proof? So in Lincoln saying there's this word demonstration that kind of means something more, proving beyond doubt, something more rigorous, more than just simple, kind of feeling good about something or reasoning through it. I consulted Webster's dictionary. So Webster's dictionary was around when Lincoln was around. They told of certain proof beyond the possibility of doubt, but I could form no idea of what sort of proof that was. I thought a great many things were proved beyond the possibility of doubt, without recourse to any such extraordinary process of reasoning as I understood demonstration to be. I consulted all the dictionaries and books of reference I could find, but with no better results. You might as well have defined blue to a blind man. At last I said, Lincoln, he's talking to himself, at last I said, Lincoln, you never can make a lawyer if you do not understand what demonstrate means. And I left my situation in Springfield, went home to my father's house, and stayed there till I could give any proposition in the 6 books of Euclid at sight, so the 6 books concerned with planar geometry. I then found out what demonstrate means and went back to my law study. So one of the greatest American presidents of all time felt that in order to be a great lawyer, he had to understand, be able to prove any proposition in the 6 books of Euclid's Elements at sight, and also once he was in the White House, he continued to do this to make him, in his mind, to fine-tune his mind to become a great president. And so what we're going to be doing in the geometry playlist is essentially that. What we're going to study is we're going to think about how do we really tightly, rigorously prove things. We're essentially going to be, in a slightly more modern form, be studying what Euclid studied 2,300 years ago to really tighten our reasoning of different statements and being able to make sure that when we say something, we can really prove what we're saying. And this is really some of the most fundamental real mathematics that you will do. Arithmetic was really just computation. Now in geometry, and what we're going to be doing is really Euclidean geometry, this is really what math is about. Making some assumptions and then deducing other things from those assumptions. What I want to do in this video is give an introduction to the language or some of the characters that we use when we talk about geometry. And I guess the best place to start is to even think about what geometry means. As you might recognize the first part of geometry right over here. You have the root word geo, the same word that you see in things like geography and geology. And this refers to the earth. This refers, my E looks like a C right over there. This refers to the earth. And then you see this metry part, and you see metry in things like trigonometry as well, and metry, or the metric system, and this comes from measurement. This comes from measurement, or measurement. So when someone's talking about geometry, the word itself comes from earth measurement, and that's kind of not so bad of a name because it is such a general subject. Geometry really is the study and trying to understand how shapes and space and things that we see relate to each other. So, when you start learning about geometry, you learn about lines and triangles and circles, and you learn about angles, and we'll define all of these things more and more precisely as we go further and further on. But also encapsulate things like patterns and three-dimensional shapes. So it's almost everything that we see, all of the visually mathematical things that we understand can in some way be categorized in geometry. Now, with that out of the way, let's just start from the basics, a basic starting point from geometry, and then we can just grow from there. So if we just start at a dot, that dot right over there, it's just a point, it's just that little point on that screen right over there. We'd literally call that a point, and I'll call that a definition. And the fun thing about mathematics is that you can make definitions. We could have called this an armadillo, but we decided to call this a point, which I think makes sense because it's what we would call it in just everyday language as well. That is a point. Now, what's interesting about a point is that it is just a position, that you can't move on a point. If you were at this point and if you moved in any direction at all, you would no longer be at that point. So you cannot move on a point. Now, there are differences between points. For example, that's one point there. Maybe I have another point over here. And then I have another point over here. And then another point over there. And you want to be able to refer to the different points. And not everyone has the luxury of a nice colored pen like I do. Otherwise, they could refer to the green point or the blue point or the pink point. And so in geometry, to refer to points, we tend to give them labels. And the labels tend to have letters. So for example, this could be point A. This could be point B, this would be point C, and this right over here could be point D. So if someone says, hey, circle point C, you know which one to circle. You know that you would have to circle that point right over there. Well, that so far it's kind of interesting. You have these things called points. You really can't move around on a point. All they do is specify a position. What if we want to move around a little bit more? What if we want to get from one point to another? So what if we started at one point and we wanted all of the points, including that point, that connect that point and another point. So all of these points right over here. So what would we call this thing? All of the points that connect A and B along a straight, and I'll use everyday language here, along kind of a straight line like this. Well, we'll call this a line segment. In everyday language, you might call it a line, but we'll call it a line segment. Because we'll see when we talk in mathematical terms, a line means something slightly different. So this is a line segment. And if we were to connect D and C, this would also be another line segment, a line segment. And once again, because we always don't have the luxury of colors, this one is clearly the orange line segment, this is clearly the yellow line segment, we want to have labels for these line segments. And the best way to label the line segments are with its endpoints, and that's another word here. So a point is just literally A or B, but A and B are also the endpoints of these line segments because it starts and ends at A and B. So let me write this, A and B are endpoints. Another definition right over here. Once again, we could have called them aardvarks or end armadillos, but we as mathematicians decide to call them endpoints because that seems to be a good name for it. And once again, we need a way to label these line segments that have the endpoints. And what's a better way to label a line segment than with its actual endpoints? So we would refer to this line segment over here. We would put its endpoints there. And to show that it's a line segment, we would draw a line over it, just like that. This line segment down here, we would write it like this. And we could have just as easily written it like this. CD with a line over it would have referred to that same line segment. BA with a line segment, with a line over it, would refer to that same line segment. Now you might be saying, well, I'm not satisfied just traveling in between A and B. And this is actually another interesting idea. When you were just on A, when you were just on a point, and you couldn't travel at all, you couldn't travel in any direction while staying on that point, that means you have zero options to travel in. You can't go up or down, left or right, in or out of the page, and still be on that point. And so that's why we say a point has 0 dimensions. 0 dimensions. Now all of a sudden we have this line segment here. And this line segment, we can at least go to the left and the right along this line segment. We can go towards A or towards B. So we can go back or forward in one dimension. So the line segment is a one-dimensional It is a one-dimensional idea almost, or a one-dimensional object, although these are more kind of abstract ideas. There is no such thing as a perfect line segment, because everything, a line segment, you can't move up or down on this line segment while being on it. While in reality, anything that we think is a line segment, even a stick of some type, a very straight stick, or a string that is taut, that still will have some width. But the geometrical pure line segment has no width. It only has a length here. So you can only move along the line, and that's why we say it's one-dimensional. A point, you can't move at all. A line segment, you can only move in that back and forth along that same direction. Now, I just hinted that it can actually have a length. How do you refer to that? Well, you refer to that by not writing that line on it. So if I write AB with the line on top of it like that, that means I'm referring to the actual line segment. If I say that, let me do this in a new color. If I say that AB is equal to 5 units, it might be centimeters or meters or whatever, or just the abstract units 5, that means that the distance between A and B is 5, that the length of line segment AB is actually 5. Now let's keep on extending it. Let's say we want to just keep going in one direction. So let's say that I started A, let me do this in a new color. Let's say I started A, and I want to go to D, but I want the option of I want to keep on going. So I can't go further in A's direction than A, but I can go further in D's direction. So this idea that I just showed, essentially it's like a line segment, but I can keep on going past this endpoint. We call this a ray. And the starting point for a ray is called the vertex. Not a term that you'll see too often. You'll see vertex later on in other contexts, but it's good to know. This is the vertex of the ray. It's not the vertex of this line segment, so maybe I shouldn't label it just like that. And what's interesting about a ray, it's once again a one-dimensional figure, but you could keep on going in you can keep on going past one of the endpoints. And the way that we would specify a ray is we would call it AD, and we would put this little arrow over on top of it to show that it is an array. And in this case, it matters the order that we put the letters in. If I put DA as a ray, this would mean a different ray. That would mean that we're starting at D, and then we're going past A. So this is not ray DA, this is ray AD. Now, the last idea that I'm sure you're thinking about is, well, what if I could keep on going in both directions? So let's say I can keep going my diagram is getting messy. So let me introduce some more points. So let's say I have point E, and then I have point F right over here. And let's say that I have this object that goes through both E and F, but just keeps on going in both directions. This is, when we talk in geometry terms, this is what we call a line. Now notice, a line never ends. You can keep going in either direction. A line segment does end. It has end points. A line does not. And actually, a line segment can sometimes be called just a segment. And so you would specify line EF. You would specify line EF with these arrows just like that. Now, the thing that you're going to see most typically when we're studying geometry are these right over here, because we're going to be concerned with sides of shapes, distances between points. And when you're talking about any of those things that have finite length, things that have an actual length, things that don't go off forever in one or two directions, then you're talking about a segment or a line segment. Now, if we go back to a line segment, just to kind of keep talking about new words that you might confront in geometry, if we go back talking about a line, I was drawing a ray. So let's say I have point X and point Y, and so this is line segment XY, so I could denote it just like that. If I have another point, let's say I have another point right over here, let's call that point Z. And I'll introduce another word. X, Y, and Z are on the same, they all lie on the same line, if you would imagine that a line could keep going on and on forever and ever. So we can say that X, Y, and Z are collinear. So those 3 points are collinear. They all sit on the same line, and they also all sit on line segment XY. Now let's say we're told that XZ is equal to ZY, and they are all collinear. So that means this is telling us that the distance between X and Z is the same as the distance between Z and Y. So sometimes we can mark it like that. This distance is the same as that distance over there. So that tells us that z is exactly halfway between x and y. So in this situation, we would call z the midpoint of line segment xy, because it's exactly halfway between. Now to finish up, we've talked about things that have 0 dimensions, points. We've talked about things that have 1 dimension, a line segment, or a ray. You might say, well, what has 2 dimensions? Well, in order to have 2 dimensions, that means I can go backwards and forwards in 2 different directions. So this page right here, or this video, or the screen that you're looking at, is a 2-dimensional object. I can go right, left, that is 1 dimension, or I can go up, down. And so this surface of the monitor you're looking at is actually 2 dimensions. 2 dimensions. You can go backwards or forwards in 2 directions. And things that are 2 dimensions, we call them planar, or we call them planes. So if you took a piece of paper that extended forever, it just extended in every direction forever, that in a geometrical sense was a plane. The piece of paper itself, the thing that's finite, and you'll never see this talked about in a typical geometry class, but I guess if we were to draw the analogy, you could call a piece of paper maybe a plane segment, because it's a segment of an entire plane. If you had a 3rd dimension, then you're talking about kind of our 3-dimensional space. In 3-dimensional space, not only could you move left or right along the screen or up and down, you could also move in and out of the screen. You could also have this dimension that I'll try to draw. You could go into the screen, or you could go out of the screen like that. And as we go into higher and higher mathematics, although it becomes very hard to visualize, you'll see that we can even start to study things that have more than 3 dimensions. What I want to do in this video is think about the difference between a line segment, a line, and array. And this is kind of the pure geometrical versions of these things. And so a line segment is actually probably what most of us associate with a line in our everyday lives. So a line segment is something just like that, for lack of a better word, a straight line. But why we call it a segment is that it actually has a starting and a stopping point. So most of the lines that we experience in our everyday reality are actually line segments when we think of it from a pure geometrical point of view. And I know I drew a little bit of a curve here, but this is supposed to be completely straight. But it's the line segment. The segment is based on the fact that it has an ending point and a starting point, or a starting point and an ending point. A line, if you're thinking about it in the pure geometric sense of a line, is essentially it does not stop. It does not have a starting point and an ending point. It keeps going on forever in both directions. So a line would look like this. A line would look like this. And to show that it keeps on going on forever in that direction right over there, we draw this arrow. And to keep showing that it goes on forever in kind of the down left direction, we draw this arrow right over here. So obviously, I've never encountered something that just keeps on going straight forever, but in math, that's the neat thing about math, we can think about these abstract notions. And so the mathematical, purest geometric sense of a line is this straight thing that goes on forever. Now, array is something in between. Array has a well-defined starting point, so that's its starting point, but then it just keeps on going on forever. So the array might start over here, but then it just keeps on going. So that right over there is array. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually try to do the Khan Academy module on recognizing the difference between line segments, lines, and rays. And I think you'll find it pretty straightforward based on our little classification right over here. So let me get the module going. Where did I put it? There you go. All right. So what is this thing right over here? Well, it has 2 arrows on both ends, so it's implying that it goes on forever. So this is going to be a line. Let's check our answer. Yeah, it's a line. Now, It's taking some time. I'll correct next question. All right, now what about this thing? Well, once again, arrows on both sides means that this thing is going to go on forever in both directions. So once again, it is a line. Fair enough. Let's do another one. Here we have one arrow, so it goes on forever in this direction, but it has a well-defined starting point. So it starts there and then goes on forever. And if you remember, that's what a ray is. One starting point, but goes on forever. So it goes, or one way to think about it, goes on forever in only one direction. So that is a ray. So let's do another question. This right over here, you have a starting point and an ending point, or you could call this the start point and the ending point, but it doesn't go on forever in either direction. So this right over here is a line segment. There you go. So hopefully that gives you enough to work your way through this module. And you might notice when I did this module right here, there is no video, and that's exactly what this video is. It's the video for this module. what I want to do in this video is think about the difference between a line segment, a line, and array. And this is kind of the pure geometrical versions of these things. And so a line segment is actually probably what most of us associate with a line in our everyday lives. So a line segment is something just like that, for lack of a better word, a straight line. But why we call it a segment is that it actually has a starting and a stopping point. So most of the lines that we experience in our everyday reality are actually line segments when we think of it from a pure geometrical point of view. And I know I drew a little bit of a curve here, but this is supposed to be completely straight. But it's the line segment. The segment is based on the fact that it has an ending point and a starting point, or a starting point and an ending point. A line, if you're thinking about it in the pure geometric sense of a line, is essentially it does not stop. It does not have a starting point and an ending point. It keeps going on forever in both directions. So a line would look like this. A line would look like this. And to show that it keeps on going on forever in that direction right over there, we draw this arrow. And to keep showing that it goes on forever in kind of the down left direction, we draw this arrow right over here. So obviously, I've never encountered something that just keeps on going straight forever, but in math, that's the neat thing about math, we can think about these abstract notions. And so the mathematical, purest geometric sense of a line is this straight thing that goes on forever. Now, array is something in between. Array has a well-defined starting point, so that's its starting point, but then it just keeps on going on forever. So the array might start over here, but then it just keeps on going. So that right over there is array. Now, with that out of the way, let's actually try to do the Khan Academy module on recognizing the difference between line segments, lines, and arrays. And I think you'll find it pretty straightforward based on our little classification right over here. So let me get the module. Going. Where did I put it? There you go. All right. So what is this thing right over here? Well, it has two arrows on both ends, so it's implying that it goes on forever. So this is going to be a line. Let's check our answer. Yeah, it's a line. Now, it's taking some time. Oh, correct. Next question. All right, now what about this thing? Well, once again, arrows on both sides means that this thing is going to go on forever in both directions. So once again, it is a line. Fair enough. Let's do another one. Here, we have one arrow, so it goes on forever in this direction, but it has a well-defined starting point. So it starts there and then goes on forever. And if you remember, that's what a ray is. One starting point, but goes on forever. So it goes, or one way to think about it, goes on forever in only one direction. So that is a ray. So let's do another question. This right over here, you have a starting point and an ending point, or you could call this the start point and the ending point, but it doesn't go on forever in either direction. So this right over here is a line segment. There you go. So hopefully that gives you enough to work your way through this module. And you might notice when I did this module right here, there is no video, and that's exactly what this video is. It's the video for this module. Let's think a little bit about two terms that you will see throughout your geometry and really mathematical career. One is the idea of things being perpendicular, and usually people are talking about perpendicular. Actually, I'm misspelling it. Perpendicular lines, normally perpendicular lines, and the idea of parallel lines, parallel lines. So perpendicular lines are two lines that intersect at a right angle. So what am I talking about? So let's say that this is one line right over here, and that this is another line right over here. We would say these two lines are perpendicular if they intersect at a right angle. So they clearly intersect. In order for them to intersect at a right angle, the angle formed between these two lines needs to be 90 degrees. And if any one of these angles is 90 degrees, the rest of them are going to be 90 degrees. So if this is 90 degrees, then these are perpendicular lines. And if that's 90 degrees, then that's going to be 90 degrees, that's going to be 90 degrees, and that's going to be 90 degrees. So if any of them are 90 degrees, the rest of them are 90 degrees, and we have perpendicular lines. If you have two lines that on a two-dimensional surface like your paper or like the screen never intersect, they stay the same distance apart, then we are talking about parallel lines. So this line right over here and this line right over here, the way I've drawn them, are parallel lines. They aren't intersecting. They're both kind of going in the same direction, but they're kind of shifted versions of each other. They will never intersect with each other. So these two are parallel. If we have two lines that, let's say they intersect, but they don't intersect at a right angle, so let's say we have that line and we have this line right over here, and they're clearly not intersecting at a right angle, then we call these neither perpendicular nor parallel lines. These lines just intersect. Identify all sets of parallel and perpendicular lines in the image below. So let's start with the parallel lines. And just as a reminder, two lines are parallel if they're in the same plane, and all of these lines are clearly in the same plane. They're in the plane of the screen you're viewing right now, but they're two lines that are in the same plane that never intersect. And one way to verify, because you can sometimes, it looks like two lines won't intersect, but you can't just always assume based on how it looks. You really have to have some information given in the diagram or the problem that tells you that they are definitely parallel, that they're definitely never going to intersect. And one of those pieces of information which they give right over here is that they show that line ST and line UV, they both intersect line CD at the exact same angle, at this angle right here. And in particular, it's at a right angle. And if you have two lines that intersect a third line at the same angle, so these are actually called corresponding angles, and they're the same. If you have two of these corresponding angles the same, then these two lines are parallel. So line ST is parallel to line UV, and we can write it like this. Line ST, we put the arrows on each end of that top bar to say that this is a line, not just a line segment. Line ST is parallel to line UV. And I think that's the only set of parallel lines in this diagram. Yep. Now let's think about perpendicular lines. Perpendicular lines are lines that intersect lines that intersect at a 90-degree angle. So, for example, line ST is perpendicular to line CD. So line ST is perpendicular to line CD. And we know that they intersect at a right angle or at a 90-degree angle because they gave us this little box here, which literally means that the measure of this angle is 90 degrees. By the exact same argument, line UV is perpendicular to CD. So UV, let me make sure I specify these as lines. Line UV is perpendicular to CD. So I did UV, ST, they're perpendicular to CD. And then after that, the only other information where they definitely tell us that two lines are intersecting at right angles are line AB and WX. So AB is definitely perpendicular to WX, line WX. And I think we are done. And one thing to think about, A, B, and C, D, those are definitely not, well, they don't even intersect in this diagram, so you can't make any comment about perpendicular, but they're definitely not parallel. You could even imagine that it looks like they're about to intersect, and they give us no information that they intersect the same lines at the same angle. So if somehow they told us that this is a right angle, even though it doesn't look anything like a right angle, then we would have to suspend our judgment based on how it actually looks and say, oh, I guess maybe those things are perpendicular, and then actually or maybe these two things are parallel, but they didn't tell us that, and that would actually be bizarre because it looks so not parallel. And actually then this would end up being parallel to other things as well if that was done. And it's a good thing that wasn't, because it would look very strange. But based on the information they gave us, these are the parallel and the perpendicular lines.